to me.
It's late March. Chap in his early 20s was travelling along a dual carriageway to visit his mum for tea. It was during the evening rush hour and the weather hadn't been great. Traffic was heavy and this driver was trying to get to a local garage before it shut for the day. The driver had been up playing computer games until about 3 a.m. that morning and was in work for shortly after 7. He had barely had 4 hours sleep. After a busy day at work, the driver got into his car and started to head to his mum's. As he crested a small rise, the traffic in front of him had suddenly started to slow down. He reacted, but far too late. As he braked, his car went out of control. It ended up sideways in lane 2, and the passenger side of his car impacted heavily with the back of a 4x4, causing the 4x4 to roll down the road several times. I was dispatched to the scene, and when I arrived, I was the first member of the emergency services to arrive that day. As I passed the scene on the opposite carriageway, I could see a small vehicle at an angle to the central reservation and 2 women pointing at the car. From my viewpoint, I couldn't see the whole scene, but the car looked fairly intact. I parked up and walked towards the incident. As I approached the car, I could see that there was very little left of the vehicle's near side, and that against the dashboard there was a young man slumped. The 2 women were just stood in shock looking at the damaged car and the young male inside. I made my way round to the driver's side and found the door opened with ease. Carefully leaning into the vehicle, I could see that the occupant was beyond help. Carefully getting back out of the car, I just looked at the 2 women and shrugged my shoulders. I'll never forget the look of abject horror that I wasn't even going to attempt first aid. When you've seen enough dead bodies, you know when someone is already beyond help. Fortunately, other members of the emergency services started to arrive, and a paramedic gave me a blanket to place over the occupant of the vehicle to give them at least some dignity. I started my investigation, identifying the occupant of the car, any witnesses, as well as beginning to piece back together what had led to the death of this young man. While I was doing this, I could hear a phone ringing from somewhere inside the vehicle. Going back into the car, I found it in one of the pockets of the deceased, and looking at the screen there was just a single word: Mum. I couldn't bring myself to answer that call, so I cut it and put the phone in my pocket. I had a colleague heading to his mum's address. News like that should not be passed over the phone. A couple of minutes later the phone rang again. Same word, Mum. This happened several more times. Each time I could only cut the call and hope my colleague would find her soon enough, and he was going to destroy her world with the news he had to break. Turned out that the driver's mum had heard about the collision on the news and was out looking for her son as he'd failed to turn up for tea and she couldn't get hold of him. We were left with no choice but to answer that call when the phone rang again. And although my colleague answered the call, I could hear the driver's mum screaming down the phone at him that he was wrong, it couldn't be her son. The investigation established that the driver of the car was almost certainly too tired to be driving. And whilst the investigation wasn't able to definitively prove it, there was a very good possibility that prior to the collision, the driver may well have experienced 1 or 2 microsleeps. It was also established that he wasn't wearing his seatbelt at the time of the collision, and this, along with the combination of driving at excess speed and being tired from a lack of sleep, cost him his life. With a lack of damage to the driver's side of the car, had the driver been wearing his seatbelt, he may very well have survived and got home to see his mum for tea. She did, however, get to see him one last time, and that was to identify his body in the local mortuary. This young man's death was totally avoidable if only he'd had enough sleep the night before. Don't think it'll never happen to you.